start with Packers-Eagles. I'm really, really looking forward to a lot of different parts of this matchup. We'll start with the Packers offense against the Eagles defense. The Packers offense is one that I just love to watch on a week-to-week basis when I talk about teams that are using motion in creative ways, whether it's pushing a linebacker out of the box, whether it's pulling a DB into the box, and then using that as an advantage to run inside, run outside, run play action behind it, or take deep shots as well. So everything feels so tied together in an offense that is really a big play hunting kind of offense where LaFleur wants to call up shots. Jordan Love is going to let that thing rip. That ball is going to be in the air. It is going to be 50 yards down the field. I'm pretty sure that he's towards the top of the league in terms of just deep target percentage. And then you look at the year that Josh Jacobs has had this year has been fun. Zach Tom at right tackle, I think that's been pretty impressive. There's just a lot to this offense that is easy to like. What do you have as some things for the Packers offense?
Yeah, you touched on so many good points there about the Packers offense. Like the big play hunting thing is really interesting because when you look at Jordan Love this year, he's done a really good job of not taking sacks. But on plays where he doesn't take sacks, the down to down consistency isn't probably as high as you'd want it if you're Matt LaFleur and the Packers offense. Jordan Love ranks 15th in success rate, but 7th in EPA per play. And so what that really means there is they're generating a lot more explosives than the average offense for someone who ranks 15th in success rate, which is just how often you're increasing your chances of scoring. And I think what that's led to a little bit is because the trust or the makeup of this offense and this pass offense isn't fully there. Matt LaFleur has really committed to establishing the run. They've had a negative 8% pass rate over expected in the back half of this season. And you mentioned some of their offensive linemen like Zach Tom that do a really good job, opening up holes for Josh Jacobs in the run game. And so that's led to this offense being 8th in EPA per play on the season. And this offense is really best when they're in 11 personnel and they have Tucker Kraft out there as their tight end. And then there are 3 or 4 receivers, that they prefer to also have out there as well. The thing to mention is Christian Watson having his season-ending injury is going to be pretty significant going forward for them because he was their go-to target against man coverage. He had a 20% target share, which was the highest of any pass catcher on the team when facing man coverage. So definitely interested to see how they handle going up against man without him. But LaFleur will try to do all the things that he can do to help this offense. He'll use motion a lot. He'll use play action a decent amount and knows that they're affected at it. So that'll be something fun to watch in this matchup and if they make it further in the playoffs.
The Packers offense was the kind of poster child for EPA versus success rate last year, right? We talked about how you have some of these teams where they're extremely explosive, but have some down and out inconsistency at times. And, it shows up on film sometimes where you'll get 3 or 4 just like dirted throws or drops kind of in the first half, and then they just explode in the second half where some of their big games. And I mean, look, you lose to teams like the Lions and the Vikings. I don't think there's any real shame in that. But for them to kind of climb back towards the end of those games, you hope that you're able to start a little bit quicker. And another thing the Packers we always talk about is the kind of wide receiver by committee. Like you're hoping that one of these guys emerges or they all can play their roles. Also, they can all kind of play interchangeable roles. It feels like they're probably a little bit disappointed with kind of how everyone has developed as a whole. I do think, there's no reason to believe that this is their ceiling. Like, I do think they will continue to grow. So there's no reason to say, hey, you're not allowed to keep on playing this sort of style. But I don't know if you've changed at all or soured kind of on the overall approach. Tage, it's easy for me to say, hey, just draft like a really good guy, right? Or just have a really good guy come in free agency. But this is the approach they've taken. I think I've looked at it very positively. There are, unfortunately, I think some cons to it just based on how things have gone as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. When you have an offense built this way, you'll have areas where you can sometimes not have that down to down consistency, like I mentioned earlier, where just because of the setup of the offense or how often you're throwing deep, You just might have areas or stretches where you're just not able to put up points. But what it leads to is like in these types of playoff games, if you're hitting on a lot of explosives, like it can really help you as the underdog. And we saw that with the Packers last season against the Cowboys, where they hit on a lot of explosives early and really just put the Cowboys in a tough spot that they couldn't come back from. And they're underdogs again in this game against the Eagles. And so if you're Matt LaFleur and the offense, you're definitely hoping for a similar thing.
Yeah, we'll talk about LaFleur. I think he has a chance to really, really put a lot of fun stuff on tape. You mentioned Jordan Love's sack avoidance. That's a really big thing. I think that raises the floor. As you mentioned, the run game, that is able to raise the floor a little bit. I do think the offensive line on the inside can be had at times in the pass game, which we'll talk about a little bit down the road here. Let's talk about the Eagles defense. Of course, maybe the most important award for Vic Fangio, the Satin Scheme defensive coordinator of the year. It feels like they really are a top defense in the league. I think that it's hard to argue that they're outside, at the very least, the top three. I really like that they're multiple up front. So when they're getting beat in 4-down looks, they bump Zach Bond down. Now you have a 5-down front. So that's just going to change how the offensive line is going to have to block. They do different things where they're moving right before the snap. They've done it a few times this season. I hope that they do it a bunch in this one because, if you're creating a false start, you're kind of just creating a tackle for loss without even having to play the down, which is really, really nice. I think they're disciplined, and it's easy to say that about teams, I think, but when you look at how, like, after a bad play, a player is kind of correcting the other player really, really quick. I think that in their zone coverage, they're really disciplined. So, like, all the areas of the field are covered, but if someone's doing nothing, they're going to find work. Like, you're not going to see players just kind of lollygagging off on grass and kind of doing nothing. I think every part of their match coverages are really, really strong. And it's interesting to look back to week one where they played a lot of spot drop zones. So a guy's kind of dropping to a spot and you're playing on that way. To me, that felt like, the nickel spot in these defenses, in these match defenses, a lot of times you have to carry a route vertical, particularly when you're seeing some of these motions that offenses like to use. So if you're a little bit afraid of your nickel carrying vertical, you're maybe lean a little bit more towards spot drop. And it feels like now you have Cooper DeJean in that spot who wasn't playing in that week one game. They feel really, really comfortable with how they're matching things. Zach Bond, in his specific coverages, like taking things off from the weak side has been really, really fun to watch this season. What do you have as some numbers for the Eagles defense?
With the Eagles defense, they rank third in EPA per play allowed on the season, but they rank first since week 10. So they've definitely improved throughout the year, which makes sense given the learning curve of a Fangio defense. They're very good against both the pass and the run. And you mentioned kind of how they deploy their defensive fronts, and they're primarily a rush four unit. They don't like to blitz that often, but when they do blitz, they very, very rarely send six pass rushers. Like if they are going to send an extra pass rusher, it'll almost always be a fifth guy in there. And so that's been interesting to watch this year. And because of the way that these corners have come on with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, you can really see that they feel comfortable playing both man and zone, and they're very good in both situations. And you brought up the week one matchup against the Packers, and this is a totally different Eagles defense than what we saw, all the way back then. Like number one, the field won't be as slippery this time, so it'll be easier for a lot of the defenders to maintain their footing on the field. But also just like Cooper DeJean moving in for Avante Maddox in the nickel position will be really helpful because we saw Jaden Reed have such a big game in that first matchup that should help out there as well. And then also just like the trust in the corners and like Fangio knowing what he has in these corners will definitely help out with this game plan also.
The corners is really interesting because Quinyon Mitchell has been awesome as a rookie. Darius Slay has played really, really well. He's made some big plays in different moments. I do think, though, as an offense, you can't look at them and say, "Oh, we're just not going to challenge them." Even if you're like a little afraid at times to throw on the outside, you still have to find a way to challenge the cornerbacks. You're going to get a safety roll down into the box with that single high look. You're going to be able to have what amounts to a one-on-one opportunity on the outside. Tage, I actually wanted to ask you real quick. A lot of their coverages, I think, like if you look at some different places with the way that it's charted, like it functionally becomes man coverage, but I feel confident in saying like it is a zone coverage call. There would be different pass offs based on how things work. I guess I'm not asking you directly, oh, like how do we become more accurate? But I guess if you have in the charting just a man versus zone split where it's like, it feels probably like it may lean towards man in terms of charting, but is actually zone. Do you think that actually matters? Or like if I'm saying like, oh well, it pretty much ends up as a receiver on the outside one on one, maybe it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's a really good point to bring up, and I definitely appreciate you pointing out how different charting services can definitely label coverages differently, and I do think that it matters because you mentioned like the pass offs, and like how you'd be treating different types of pass catchers differently based on the actual call. So I think like it's always good to, if you have multiple data sources, to double check, especially when it comes to coverages, because you have next gen stats, who's doing it in like real time, like they're using some transformers or convolutional neural networks to classify coverages while they're happening in the game, and you can get initial data from that. But then you have charting services like our friends at FTN Data or SIS or PFF, who go through after the game and are manually labeling coverages as well. So it's always really good to cross reference both of those. And when I was trading a coverage classification model a couple years ago for the Big Data Bowl, like I tried to use two different data sources, and I threw out any plays where they disagreed on what the coverage was at like the more granular level of like cover three, cover two man, cover one. Just because I didn't want to train my classification model on any play that it could be debated on what type of coverage it was. But it's probably, I mean, it is ultimately good for those types of models to learn about those coverages. So like, that's where I think like someone like you is really, really helpful in like just explaining to someone like me the differences between why what some of the Eagles zone coverages are, like that they're running, could be classified as man.
And look, I'm not going to pretend like I'm right every single time because I'm not. I'm also just guessing based on I think like the most reasonable answer on all that. I mean, look at you giving out all this free advice here, Tej. I love it. Think about back to the Eagles defense. The one spot, like when I look at the unit overall, it actually kind of surprises me sometimes that the Eagles defense is so good because the edge rushers are not dominant. They have not been this unit where they obviously 1-2 rush four. Like that is what they want to do, but they're not just getting kind of knockdowns, pressures, and a ton of sacks from the edge spot. So I really wonder in a game where, like I mentioned, I think the Packers are comfortable with Zach Tom out there at tackle. You can have a situation where if you're sliding the center to Jalen Carter every single snap, pretty much. If you're not able to win on that other guard one-on-one for the Eagles defense, it can be a chance where you're not generating a ton of pressure, which that I think would be a tough situation overall. What are you thinking over here as a good matchup from the Packers offense perspective?
Yeah, so I texted you about this when we were preparing for this show, and I was looking through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of advantages that the Eagles defense has in this game. The one thing I think I found for the Packers is that play action is something that they should be able to have some success with, where they use play action on about 24% of dropbacks, which is the 12th highest rate in the league, but they are the most efficient team when using play action this season. Like LaFleur does such a good job drawing up his play action plays. Love and even Willis at times like seemed comfortable operating the offense when using play action. And the Eagles are good relative to the league at defending play action, but obviously still worse at facing play action plays versus non-play action. And so this is an area where I think that the Packers will try to get them in this game.
I like that. And I feel like whoever is lined up on the defensive side of the ball, that's how LaFleur is going to attack you, right? Like you're going to try and find a way to microscope the linebackers. And in their first game, they had a situation where they were able to draw Nakobe Dean inside. There was also a situation where it was a run, but Dean felt like it was a play action. So he kind of removed himself from just like the area that he needed to be in. I do think Dean has really grown a lot this year. He's playing fast downhill. I think he's been like just better overall in terms of reading run versus pass and everything
Mm-hmm.
like that. But the Packers are going to run inside. Like it is going to be a lot of stress to tackle Josh Jacobs snap after snap. They're going to present you with enough for you to want to bite down and for you to try and get closer to the line and try and throw that just like tight end kind of over route right behind it. So that's going to be a fun matchup to look at. I do really want to see Jordan Love push the ball outside. And I guess it's something that you can almost guarantee that it's going to happen just because that's like what their offense is in so many ways. I'm interested to see the different ways that Like they'll have two receivers kind of tied together and then one further outside. When you motion that outside receiver into it, you're creating like a moving bunch in a little bit of a different way. I want to see if the Eagles defense is fully prepared from a one speed perspective and then two just from a communication perspective, passing things off constantly. Where LaFleur I think can use that to open up space underneath at times as well. So it's going to be a tape that I'm really looking forward to. And to me, really like this part of the matchup is something that I think is just it's going to be so strong. I think in different parts. What are you looking at as you mentioned? So many positives I think for the Eagles defense for a general matchup, but in this one, what do you have?
Yeah, the main area where I think the Eagles will have a big advantage in this game is on short passing plays. So when the Packers throw under 5 air yards, I think the Eagles will be treating all of those like a win, basically, because the Eagles are the best defense in the league at defending passes under 5 air yards. The Packers are about league average at throwing short passes, and so this Packers offense is above league average in a lot of things, but they're around league average when throwing short passes. And you look at the first matchup, and there were 14 passes that they threw under 5 air yards, and the Packers had a negative zero point 0.8 EPA on those plays and a 35% success rate. On passes that they threw over 5 air yards, they had a plus zero point 0.3 EPA, so significantly higher, and a 42% success rate. So that was their way of generating explosives, especially through Jaden Reed. And if the Packers are throwing short in this game, Fangio will be very, very happy as a play caller.
The Eagles have uh, been a very good tackling team. Like you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
the easy clip is Cooper DeJean tackling Derrick Henry, but they have done a good job limiting explosive plays after the catch. Really outside the first few weeks of the season, and the Packers game had a bunch of examples of guys missing tackles, guys being just like a touch out of position, and the Packers really being able to take advantage of that. So I'm kind of glad that the Eagles get to face them again because I think you're going to have a situation where your defense is in just a different world than you were week one, obviously with the players, but then also just with the way that I think they've been playing techniques overall. And like I mentioned, the spot drop zone in week one, I think it ended up having some success. You have some issues where the Packers are able to create explosive plays off of it. I'm excited to see how the zone coverage looks kind of like through the early parts of the down. Obviously, as things go on later, as I mentioned, it becomes kind of one-on-ones or the ball is just like it is getting thrown away or it's going deep and outside. I want to see, in that early part, is it a situation where LaFleur wants to push the time to throw down, where you're throwing some of those quick routes? Are the Eagles cornerbacks comfortable challenging the receivers where you'll have your call as a cornerback for Fangio? And based on who you are as a cornerback, based on the matchup, you can change what your leverage is in terms of like I'm going to play this, I'm going to start this one a little bit deeper off, I'm going to start this one press but still kind of getting back. So I think that will be a fun one to watch. Speaking of fun things to watch, Tage, what do you have as a fun matchup maybe from the offense's perspective?
Yeah, we've touched on this a little bit, but going into more detail on it, the Jaden Reed versus Cooper DeJean matchup will be so interesting in this game. Where you had Avante Maddox in the Cooper DeJean role. Week one, he did not play well against the Packers, and Next Gen Stats did like a really good job of pointing this out. Where they talked about how since Cooper DeJean has taken over as the nickel in the Eagles defense since their week 5 bye, they've allowed 5.2 yards per slot target, which is 1.2 yards fewer than any other defense in the league. So he's done such a good job in that spot. The defense definitely feels more comfortable with him there. And Jaden Reed had such a good game last time against the Eagles. And if they don't get their opportunities in this game with him, they'll really have to look elsewhere to generate passing offense.
I would love to see Jaden Reed kind of on an outbreaker earlier on, just because, you know, Fangio's defense has a lot of ways where if you're running kind of a deep crosser to rob from the opposite side, whether it's a weak safety or kind of dropping down in that sort of way. So I hope that DeJean is able to kind of hold up in that. Again, it's not man coverage; it is zone coverage, but it becomes like, hey, like if this guy's breaking outside, like he's my guy. So finding different ways to do that. And there is a question for the Eagles overall in this one where look, the Vikings and the Lions had success against the Packers by playing man coverage. And, that is obviously the Lions' identity. That is not the Vikings' identity. But when you look at the Packers without Christian Watson, I think when you look at the Eagles' defensive backs as a whole, saying, I think you might be comfortable playing man coverage, where the first third down against the Packers in week one was man coverage. Avante Maddox got beat.
Mhm.
You don't have that same exact matchup and situation in this game. You're not going to have Christian Watson, as you mentioned, as just kind of such a big man beating receiver. So I feel like a lot of it has to come down from LaFleur scheming things open. Like it really is a chance for him, I think, to dig so deep into the bag. Like I want LaFleur to put stuff out on tape that like everyone's clipping it up on the second the tape comes out and say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe he used this trick play. And LaFleur has done that so successfully in so many, like all of the Malik Willis tape this season. Oh, Willis has played well or did play well. Like I don't want to take anything away from him there, but like really, really smart design run game and just creative ways
Mhm.
to attack a defense. So in this one, my eyes are certainly going to be on that 11 personnel. We're motioning a guy. We're bumping your slot out. We're getting DeJean out of the box. Are you going to pull a safety down? Can you stop this run from the nickel? Because if you can't, there are going to be so many problems that flow down from that. Fangio's not going to put base personnel on the field against 11 personnel. Like that's just not what he does. That's not what most people in the league do. But the way that the Packers run game works overall, I don't know. It gets me a little bit of pause at times.
Yeah, I think sometimes these play callers have like a lot of fun when they have a different type of quarterback in the mix versus what they usually have before. Like, or they just get like really excited about the prospect of having like a more mobile quarterback with LaFleur with the Willis run game, like how much fun he had with that. Or I think about like in 2020 with the Rams when John Wolford was starting at the end of the season, and like McVay was just like kind of having fun with some of the mobility that he had over Goff, or even like one that didn't work out with like there's that famous story of Kyle Shanahan like drawing up plays on his iPad after seeing Trey Lance's pro day, where it's like he's just like thinking about like how much more fun his run game can be with him replacing Jimmy G in there. So it's like yeah, sometimes these play callers just have like a really fun time with more mobile quarterbacks and like how they want to design their run game.
I love it. I mean, there was the stories with Belichick, right? Like when Brissett's in there, like, oh, we can get some kind of single wing
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
or them just like running a total shenanigans offense station. You mentioned the Shanahan Trey Lance one. That's actually, I think that was the first time we ever potted together. Was like early on when we were starting to look forward to that season with Lance. I mean, I've seen some of those run game installs, and it makes me sad just to see not all of that be able to work out. Let's move on here to the Eagles' offense against the Packers' defense. Eagles offense overall. Obviously, you can just look right at the offensive line and Saquon Barkley. I love the rushing attack, not only because of the players, but because it is varied. And it's varied, even though they'll kind of keep the core concept. So you're going to get a lot of quick counter. You're going to get a lot of inside zone. You're going to get some pin and pull. But I do think Kellen Moore, obviously Jeff Stoutland there as well, have done a good job adding maybe not always just motion, but it's okay. We're like one time Saquon's the inside guy, Jalen Hurts is the outside guy. One time Jalen Hurts is the inside guy, Saquon's the outside guy. So even if up front, when you're drawing it up, it's the exact same blocking scheme, you're still giving the linebackers, you're still giving the defense a little bit more just to look at overall. So I do like that because, I mean, they can just hand the ball straight and run by from most teams, and they can really lean on teams as you get a little bit later on in the game, but to also add a little bit of creativity. That has been good. The passing attack, a little bit less varied. I think they have struggled at times. They've shown some really high highs, and you'll get that when you have AJ Brown, when you have Devontae Smith, when you have Hurts throwing that outside deep ball. And I mean, Jalen Hurts missed in the last 3 games. Obviously, he played a little bit in that
Mhm.
Washington game. All the signs, I certainly feel like he's going to be able to play on Sunday. There's just like, oh man, like there's a little bit of hitch in the, I think, rhythm at like a high level. Although I think in the games that he was playing towards the end there, it did feel like things were moving in the right direction. So the matchup overall, Packers offense has this like glass cannon kind of feel where they can put up 40 on anyone, or they might have struggles. The Eagles running game can run on anyone, but the passing game can find a way to struggle. So I kind of love it overall, just from a narrative perspective. What do you have as some thoughts for the Eagles offense?
Yeah, I thought you brought up a lot of really interesting points about the Eagles offense there. Really what I'm looking at is like their run game, like you mentioned. They have had an elite rushing attack this year. Offensive line has been playing great. The Saquon Barkley effect to this offense has definitely been felt by opposing defenses. And what that's led to is the lowest pass rate over expected in the league. Like when adjusting for situation, the Eagles are running the ball more often than any other team. Because when they're dropping back, like they do have a problem with Hurts taking sacks, more often than he should be behind how good this offensive line is. And I think that is definitely a little bit of an issue for them. But when they do drop back and they're successful, it's usually because the target was to AJ Brown, who has a 99 ESPN receiver score this year, which is the highest in the league. So he's been playing phenomenally there, and the offensive tackle play is just so good in this offense. Timo Riske at PFF does a really cool graph on how often offensive tackles are left on an island, which means no help by an offensive guard, a running back, or a tight end, and then how well they do when left on an island. And Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata are top two in how often they're left on an island. They're usually there on an island around 75% of the time, and they're first and second in grade over expected when left on an island. So it's such an advantage for this Eagles offense to have those two guys that don't need much help from tight ends or guards, and they can just like take on edge rushers on their own because it allows them to do so much more with their pass blocking inside.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. It is such a luxury to, I mean, some of the pockets that the quarterbacks will throw through, it is just like, wow. Like you are not seeing that on tape for every single team. You just aren't. Like they are not at the same level as these guys. I really think Mailata has taken a full step forward already from being a very good tackle to being like a, a top end guy. So that has been really fun to watch. And if you take the way that we talk about the Eagles defense, the way that we talk about the Eagles offensive infrastructure, it's like, oh, that's a Super Bowl team. But then you look at it a little bit further and you're like, all right, well, the edge rushers, that's kind of the issue on defense. The
Mhm.
passing game, that's kind of the issues on offense. And that gives you like, I could see them losing in the first round, which I think is it's fun to look at, but it's also like frustrating at a certain level. I guess I don't know. You could call that exciting. Just I think a good team from a narrative perspective. There is going to be content around the Philadelphia Eagles one way or the other. Tage, let's move on here to the Packers defense, where for me, it feels like they have been a little bit of an overachieving defense. I think their four down front overall maybe hasn't been what they expected coming into the season. I thought it was a deep defensive line unit overall. They could get after the passer. I think they've struggled a bit at a few different spots up front, but Edgerrin Cooper, I mean, Edgerrin Cooper played 11 snaps in that first game against the Eagles. So he has been a revelation certainly through the entire season. I can't wait to see him against this run game. He is going to be running downhill. They're going to be chasing splash plays. I think that they should be overall when you look at just offensive talent versus defensive talent overall. But then you also don't have Jair Alexander in this one. So that could make Philadelphia more comfortable to throw on the outside. But as we mentioned, I mean, they're a high like run rate over expected team overall. What do you have as some thoughts for the Packers defense?
Yeah, Packers defense has been really tough to figure out this year from a stats perspective on like their face. It's fourth in EPA per play allowed. Like that seems like a good defense, but they're 21st in success rate allowed. So I really looked to see if they were just generating a lot of EPA off of turnovers. And I do think that's happening a little bit to an extent. They're seventh on EPA per play allowed when you remove all turnovers. And what you really find out is when they let up a positive play, they really just minimize the explosiveness of that positive play. And so, out of all defenses, when they're letting up a play that has a positive EPA, they're the best at not allowing those plays to go on for a ton of EPA. Like, I think the Browns were on the other end of the spectrum this year where they were better in success rate than EPA per play allowed because when they were letting up positive plays, it was usually going for like 40, 50 yards. Whereas the Packers are just containing more of these positive plays, not allowing it to go over 15 yards most of the time. And you can point to a lot of things on this defense as the reason for that. Halfley's scheme is definitely helping with that. The safety play that they've been getting, particularly from Xavier McKinney, I think has played a big part of that. And just like the general zone coverage that they play a lot of and that they're good when doing so. And they do a lot of things right as a defense. They can get to the quarterback and sack them at a decent rate. They cannot allow yards after catch at a decent rate as well. And so all of that together kind of shows like why this defense has been able to be pretty successful so far this season.
You mentioned the zone coverage. You mentioned the limiting yards after the catch. When you play kind of spot drop zone, and sometimes I feel like for Fangio's defense, right? I'm like, oh, I love all the match zone. The spot drop zone, it has a lot of value in that you're getting vision on the quarterback. It's really like try and close space as much as you can. But if it's a throw, it's, like throw, catch, tackle. And the Packers are able to do that at a high level. And then as the down extends a little bit, that ball gets thrown down the field. McKinney can really cover so much space that it is just a problem as a defense overall. I think the games that they've lost, teams have really attacked the middle of the field overall. The Eagles are not a passing offense that has consistently conflicted linebackers and thrown over the middle of the field in the ways that a team like the Lions have. Obviously, in that game that we saw, the Vikings were able to do that. So, that makes me feel, I think, a little bit shaky. At the same time, though, you start to look outside, and I think that Tish, knowing how much you love AJ Brown, you mentioned his receiver score. My assumption is that that's kind of the matchup you like in terms of the Eagles' offense.
Yeah, I mean, you know me too well here. Yeah, it's definitely AJ Brown targets in general, obviously, but AJ Brown targets versus zone specifically is where I think that the Eagles' offense can have an advantage in this game. He has a 68% success rate when targeted versus zone coverage this season. As I mentioned earlier, the Packers are going to play a lot of zone. They're usually pretty good at it, but it's AJ Brown. Like it's very very tough to stop this guy, and so I think that the Eagles should have a lot of success when throwing to him in zone in this game.
Along with that, I'm excited to see the Eagles run inside. I think that you can beat them at the first level. I'm just fascinated to see, is Hafley going to have Edgerrin Cooper kind of knifing in that backside A gap where when an offense is running counter, there's going to be a vacated space to get a run through. So, like I mentioned, I think that you have to one, obviously understand that you're the underdog in this moment, but also that you as a unit for the Packers, like we mentioned with the offense with LaFleur taking a lot of trick plays and shots in that sort of way, the Eagles can beat you straight up. So you don't always want to necessarily play them straight up. I think that some of the zone coverage looks are going to be a problem for the Eagles offense. I'm not sure, what your blitz style is overall, but I still think that there's like a clear path to victory in my mind. And I think it's partially with, creating early down run stops with Edgerrin Cooper as that run through type of player. You're muddying up looks in zone coverage on the defensive side. And then your offense is, I think, can outpace any team in the league when it's hot. So I really do like the matchup. Tage, what do you think as another just kind of good or matchup you feel comfortable with or situation you feel comfortable with for the Packers defense?
Yeah, I mean the Packers are going to have a pretty big upper hand in this game when they are able to put pressure on Jalen Hurts, and that seems obvious for like any quarterback. Like obviously you want to get pressure on them, but the drop off from Hurts's play when kept clean to when pressured is as big as any other quarterback in the league. Like he has a massive drop off. In terms of performance when pressure, he's taken a lot of sacks when pressured. He's not able to create like he was able to in like 2022, for example. And the Packers have done a good job of taking advantage of turning their pressures into sacks. So I definitely think that is something to watch out for in this game. Is if Hurts is getting pressured early and sorry, early in the game, like I think that it could be something that would maintain throughout the game, and the Packers would be able to do well off of that.
In that first matchup, there was a few examples where Hurts, there was one where he's kind of scrambling to his right. He's extending the play. He's throwing the ball back across the middle a little bit. Jair Alexander made a sick play to intercept it in the end zone. There were situations also, though, when the Packers sent a blitz and Hurts was like, all right, like I'm good with that. Easy and Baker to AJ Brown. You're not going to be able to cover him. So that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch where I do think the Packers defense has been able to build on itself through the entire season, getting a little bit more funky on third downs, having these like niche kind of third and 7 to 10 situations where you can get a double mug look. You can just like eject a safety from one side of the field to the other. So they have that little bit of funkiness in them that I think makes it even more fun. But like you mentioned, when Hurts is playing on time, it is really fun to watch. It is in rhythm. It is just like hitting receivers' hands over and over. I think he does throw like a really accurate ball overall in the like short area field, in the intermediate area of the field, in the deep area of the field. But like you mentioned, when he gets pressured, when you have some of those, like holding the ball, part of that is at times certainly on the scheme where it's, stationary receivers. And if you don't make that throw, there's just like nothing that you can go to. It's either you're going to your check down or you're kind of throwing the ball out of bounds. So if in the first like 3, 4 drives, or they have issues, they have had that the whole entire season where I think they're like 30th in EPA per drive on their first 2 drives.
Yeah.
and then they just take off after that. So I think that'll be frustrating. And I mean, we could see the first 4 drives of this game go like punt, 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 just based on how both of these teams struggle sometimes at the start of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really funny if that happened, but yeah, I mean, it has been, like, really interesting that both of these offenses, sometimes struggle out of the gate, but then just really just, like, flip the switch, once they are able to get settled, so, yeah, I mean, starting quickly will be so important in this game, given how committed both of these teams are to running the ball, and these play callers really just want to, or they just feel comfortable, when they're establishing the run. And if they have to go into expected pass situations early, it might be a worry for them. And something I've always thought is really interesting is like Hertz has usually shown up pretty well in terms of his production on in expected pass situations, but his perception of like when you talk to people about his performance in expected pass situations, like they're always lower than where he actually ranks. And so I guess it's just more of like a vibes thing. But I've always thought that's been interesting about him.
Yeah, I do think like when you look at the offense overall, it's like, all right, well, they have a really good offensive line, they have really good receivers, they have a really good running back. So the easy thing is to be like, well, maybe it's on the quarterback. I do think like Hurts has the high end outcome in him. Like he really, really does. He's shown it at times this season. He showed it at times last season. He obviously showed it in the season when they made the Super Bowl. So I I uh I want to see them make a run, Tage. I want to see them make a run because I would love to have the Lions play against the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. I do think it'd be fun just to watch the like Aaron Glenn kind of what is he going to do to just frustrate Jalen Hurts. But hey, before that, got to win one game at a time. You got the Packers first. That will be a fun one to